Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Eric Elwell. He's an art community savant. He's also a professional concept artist. He's going to talk to us all about creativity, marketing, succeeding as a creative entrepreneur. And he's got a lot of experience in this area, and I'm really happy to have him on. So, Eric, welcome.
Hello, Christopher. Thanks for having me on. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I know kind of, set the ground stage, talk about you yourself, your work, and how the audience can benefit from your expertise today.
Sure. My name is Eric Elwell. I've been working as a professional concept artist in the games industry since 2006. And so concept art, it's a type of art that is kind of dual purpose. It's supposed to communicate an idea for a team to develop. And you also kind of have that like cool factor. It's supposed to kind of instantly grab you. And so you're testing out a whole bunch of different ideas, but then ultimately you're not married to one thing. It's not like, in my personal work, I might be putting something out there as like, this is my idea or this is what I think is cool. But when you're working in a team on a big product like a game, there's so many other artists down the line and other aspects of that need to be considered. And so it really is a design process rather than an artistic kind of free expression type thing. So it has a function within a system. So I've been doing that for about 20 years. And then on the side, I've been doing some of my own work. So I've been dabbling in 3D printing, that sort of thing. I say dabbling, but really at this point, I've been doing this for about 5 years, and I've developed my own line of tabletop miniatures for that. Let's see what else. I've illustrated children's books. I do plein air painting on a digital platform. So of an iPad, there's a program called Procreate for the iPad, which is a very slick painting program. And I got into a practice of going to a local park. When I would take my kids, here and there, we would stop at this park and just do a quick sketch. And we did that for about a year. And it's interesting, those type of projects over time, they build up. And then you look back and you see all of these things that you've created just with a simple, weekly or daily discipline. And so that positioned me to be featured in a book on that by 3D Total. So I've dabbled in like kind of these different areas. The concept art's been kind of the bread and butter, the professional work, and then all these other kind of expressions on the side have given me an outlet to explore other things and kind of not just explore other interests, but also inform the work with kind of just a variety of input.
Yeah, that's a really interesting background and story. So, kind of starting on, this journey is I want to talk about this concept because this idea of you talked about it was called concept art and excuse me, but kind of talk about how concept art fits into video games, why video games as opposed to other types of creative media.
Sure. So video games in particular, you have to create a whole number of assets for a game. So, if you're a character walking through a world, what does that building look like? What's someone's got to make that door and everything in the room, from the boxes and the tables and everything. And that's all the background stuff. And so typically games, when you're working on a team, it gets split into environment and character. Those are kind of the main big categories. There's also, for certain types of games, you might have something like an item or a weapon that's like kind of right in your view, and so that's another specialty. And you're really thinking about screen time. You can think about it kind of like a movie. What's on the screen most of the time, and then you have these kind of supporting roles that build out that story. And so concept art, you're working with partly, well, you're kind of hearing the big picture of the game, That's the writing and so forth. And you've got to communicate to the rest of the team what is being built. So you could kind of think about it almost like you're working on the blueprints for what's going to be made. And so to some degree, concept art used to be kind of like you'd consider it almost like a rock star thing back in the day. That was like, you got to make really cool stuff and inspire the team and so forth. Over time, it has become something that is more informational, right? Some work is designed to be like an illustration that inspires and casts this vision. Some work is really simply, you're defining things. You're taking an object and you're showing it from different angles, and then you're pointing things out and saying, okay, this right here needs to be leather, and this needs to be metal, and this needs to be, and you don't necessarily have to present that in its best light, compositionally as this beautiful painting. It's just a communication. And so that might not answer the question perfectly. I mean, that's the idea of what the job entails. But how does that fit into the team? Well, it clarifies the vision, because you may have 10 artists or so working on a single asset or something adjacent, right? So you've got, let's say, a character, for example. Your concept artist is going to listen to the feedback from the leadership team. They're going to help kind of visualize the prompts about, like, who is this character? Think like Indiana Jones or something, right? Who is Indiana Jones? What makes him who he is? You hear the descriptors and you start to build that visually, and then you have to come down to very specific decisions. What to keep, what to cut, what communicates the vision, and then you're thinking about down the road. Someone's going to have to model this out. Someone else is going to have to animate it. Someone else is going to texture it. That means you take the 3D model and you've got to paint it and make it look realistic. And that's just assuming, I mean, those are just the kind of categories of work. And that may actually span several different artists. You even have artists whose specialty is hair, because there's in games, that's you can have like a model, a block hair. Or if you really want that to be realistic, it takes a whole lot more work. And it's not just painting it out. It's, the physics of how it moves as the character moves and that sort of thing. So there's certain specialties, and there's typically teams that will kind of take a portion of it. You'll take it to a certain level, and then you'll pass it off to someone else and they'll finish it. Even within that creation of the 3D model, you have typically at least two artists there. One who does like a high definition sculpt, that would be like a 3D model that's really highly detailed, almost like movie quality. And then that gets projected onto a lower definition 3D model that can run real time on your device. And so typically those are different artists. I mean, it may vary from team to team. So all that to say that you've got a whole team of artists, and we're only talking about one asset. We're talking about a character right now. And so all of that has to be communicated, and that's the concept artist's job, is to set the vision so that everyone's kind of looking at the same thing and saying, okay, if it meets that vision, then it's correct, right? And that's where it's kind of taking the subjectiveness of art, of like, is this cool? Is this not cool? Do you like it or not? There's very kind of loose terms, and it kind of clarifies it to a deliverable objective. It's like, this is the mark, and everyone's aiming at that, right? And that's the concept artist's job, is to find that mark visually.
Yeah, really interesting. Which kind of brings me to my next question is, video games, and where do you see concept art evolving with the metaverse and with like virtual reality, and kind of because now it's like video games where it's like 2D, but then how is it going to play out in a whereas a spatial realm where you've got like Apple or Oculus, or what other types of lens in these immersive environments?
Yeah, so I've gotten to work on a few VR projects,
Mhm.
and actually some of the work I've created is done in VR.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting area. So this has actually been a kind of one of my areas of interest. or just personally, aside from the professional work. And that is, there's an interface between the physical, traditional work, the physical world, and then the digital world. And so when you're creating, for example, a 3D model, you have a 2D interface. You get a screen right in front of you, and you're trying to make a 3D object and give that illusion of space, but you're working through a 2D interface to get there. And so with VR, you have this opportunity to work in a three-dimensional space. So if you're thinking, for example, let's just simplify it and say you're making a sphere, right? Of course, you can do that mathematically on a 2D interface, but as you're kind of working with that, you can only look at it in one. Actually, a sphere is kind of a bad example because it would be the same regardless of how you look at it. Maybe a cube, right? You're only looking at it in one perspective, and then you've got to rotate that model virtually through a 2D interface. Whereas when you're working with a 3D headset on, you can just move your hand, and whatever articulation that you're doing with your hands is what's happening in that 3D space. So you don't have that like 2D intermediary, if that makes sense. And so I can give you some examples of this. So I have these two models here. This model is this was done traditionally through ZBrush, and it's modeled out by, you start with a cube and you grab some points and kind of adjust them and so forth. I have a few other models. Now these aren't painted to the same finish, but this one was done in VR, where all these curvatures and stuff were just done by like actually literally just dragging my hand into those motions. And I think it communicates, if I hold these up side by side, I think you can kind of see that there's more of a gestural quality. This feels more like it's closer to hand drawn, right? And that was part of my exploration with that. So with VR, you have this opportunity on the tools side to create something that that feels more natural. That's and because it's closer to the original kind of hand motions and marks. That has its benefits. When you're creating something that's very technical, that benefit kind of goes away, right? If, for example, if you're trying to do something like CAD or architectural, it'd be nice to be in the space. You get a better maybe impression of it. But in terms of that kind of gestural quality, like that's less important in that context. So that's on the creation side. On the experiential side, VR games. So I'm thinking of two games that I worked on. One is called Ziggy's Cosmic Adventures, and it's like a space game, and you're in the cockpit of the ship, and there's all of these things that go wrong, and you've got to turn dials and flip switches and do all these different hand motions. And I think they did on the design side a very good job of creating this experience that really leveraged that VR space, where you've got basically all these different kind of kinesthetic motions and stuff that run the game, right? I think we're very used to the Xbox controller interface or the keyboard and mouse interface, and so this, I think, really exploits that medium, where it feels like all these different kind of interesting motions. Another game that I worked on was Homeworld Vast Reaches, and that was it's a space strategy game. So you have all these spaceships and stuff, and you're kind of floating above it and in it, and that's a very different experience in VR than on the PC. So yeah, there is opportunity there. I think with any of these mediums, there's a lot of initial excitement around like, oh, this is going to be a game changer. And in time, they kind of fall into their place where you understand, okay, these are the benefits of it and the drawbacks. And VR, I think we're getting close to understanding, what it's good for and what it's not. And I think the technology obviously will make a change in that as well. Namely, having this thing on your head for maybe an hour and a half that's about the limit that I can manage with it. And at that point, I don't want the weight on me. I don't want it touching my skin. I just kind of want to be out back in the world, So it does have certain limitations. I think technology will make it, we can address some of those issues in time, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah. The next question I have for you is, what's really interesting is this area of artificial intelligence, and it's really it's a lot of taking off just both in infrastructure as well as use applications utility, and then you combine that with robots. It's going to be really interesting. Where does art and what you do coincide with this intersection of AI and technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one that is really all over the place in the art world right now. And when I say the art world, I mean particularly artists in entertainment, and that would be like art for commercial use, right? So commercially, AI sounds really great. It's like we can test a whole bunch of things really quickly, cheaply. Particularly my job as a concept artist, like what I described to you, well, you could certainly see how AI would fill that role. You say, yeah, what would be cool? Let's say, going back to Indiana Jones, there's a professor who likes to go, exploring and digging up artifacts, and you just start typing that in, and you ask an AI to give you an image, and it will give you an image. And so that it is pretty cool. I'll say there's a lot to be said on that issue. And so the first thing I'll kind of start with the background. I've experimented with AI in this area. So I'm not just saying any of this from a point of like, oh, this is just my angry opinion of, I might lose my job because AI is going to take over or whatever, right? I think that it has potential as a tool. I think that it also is, everyone's kind of understanding it as it's kind of a new era, right? Like this tool has a lot of power to it, and how it's used will be important, right? So you could say it's perhaps as significant as the internet or as significant as electricity. Like it's going to be a game changer, whether you like it or not. It's here and it's happening. And so, with that knowledge, you have to inform yourself. You have to get in there. I'm not saying you have to buy the line, hook, line, and sinker. I'm just saying you need to investigate it and try it. And so for the art side of things, I was trying to integrate it into my workflow to see where could this benefit my whether that's speed things up or give me some more creative prompts, or maybe a combination of that where I could have it study my work, and then I can go a little bit farther faster. And so the idea with that is not necessarily like, oh, I want to be lazy and just throw prompts in and let this thing work. I'll give you an example. One of the areas that I wanted to work in was there is a tool that can analyze footage, and then you can take one of those frames and you can paint over that frame, and then it can basically make correlations between that and the remaining frames. And so you could, for example, you could shoot a scene of I don't know, let's say you've got like a little spaceship and you want to do a space scene, right? And you've got a model, just a small setup, and you fly this thing by, and then you go in and you paint that scene out. You paint that ship to look really cool. You put nebulas in the background and all this stuff. And then you let the AI interpret the scene that you painted against the rest of the frames in terms of where things are located and what the motion is. And you can get yourself kind of like 80% there and save a ton of work and explore some interesting ideas doing that. So AI certainly has potential. Where do I see it changing things? Well, certainly commercially, it's already in use. There are some interesting stories. I would say generally, though, and I'm kind of hitting a bunch of different points here, but hopefully they all kind of come together. Generally, I would say in the commercial artist world, this is highly controversial, and a lot of people are angry. There are different kind of groups picking sides, right? And so some of the major places where artists congregate, you'll see almost like protest level people demanding, what's your stance on AI, right? And there are some legal cases that are coming together as well. And so, briefly, if you allow me, explaining what the outrage is. The outrage is essentially twofold. One is that concern over work, like, is this thing going to replace me? But I would say there's a certain maturity level in artists who have been in the industry for a while, and they're less concerned about that, and they're more concerned about the kind of ethical sourcing. So, how these image AI work is they take vast numbers of data, just tons and tons of images, and the correlations are made. If you could say, you could put it in a grid, right? And correlations are made between any image that has like a cat in it, or you could say painting or whatever. Right? So whatever your term is, it's looking at everything that has that in it, and then it's looking for correlations between those things. And then when you run a prompt, you're getting kind of a synthesis of how the AI understands the correlation of all of these images on that topic. And so one of the problems that has come to light is that the source material, the source images that were fed into some of these AI systems were not properly licensed. So the artists were not compensated. They didn't really have the fair use of these images. And there's a whole legal quagmire around that because it was done out of research. And so where it was done, and the laws in that region allowed them to skirt copyright laws in order to use these images. But then it was released, my understanding, at least I'm no legal expert, but my understanding was that it was released as the results of that model were then released, and many of the systems that are now used today were built off of that. And so those systems are in commercial use, and the source material was not licensed properly. And so that's where a lot of artists are upset. They're saying, hey, look, we're happy to move into this new era. We're happy to kind of figure out how this works into our workflow, what this can do for us. And I might even be happy to contribute my work, but you got to ask me first, and I need to be compensated for that. And so that I understand is the kind of crux of this, the legal debate going on. Obviously, it's ongoing, and I personally am not a part of it. But you have to understand that that's the context of like artists working in this industry. It's pretty volatile. And then on the other side, you have artists who are saying, hey, look, I'm just going to embrace it. It's here. Let's figure it out. And I would say I wouldn't put myself right in the middle of that. I would say that I hear all of these arguments. I've tried it myself. I found some usefulness to it. I didn't find it as useful as working with a professional. And that's partly for things that eventually I think will get better, right? Partly that's the iterative process. You put a prompt in, you get a result back. It has potential, and sometimes it's pretty cool, but then you're saying, well, actually, it needs to have this, or this has got to be changed. And the system currently is not really built for that. You can put your prompt back in and get something back that's another synthesis of the same idea. So it could be completely different sometimes. So that's not particularly useful. I did track my own progress. I've showed you these tanks here. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to throw some prompts in and see what an AI comes up with. If I do, for example, one of them was if I have a beer stein that's like a traditional kind of ceramic German thing, and we build a tank out of that. So it's like this decorative thing that's kind of over the top. Still looks kind of fragile, but it's a tank, right? And so I threw that in as a prompt, and I wanted to see what I would get back. And I tracked every single image that I generated and the prompts that I had, and I built out this map to kind of show the various trees of like how ideas got generated. And I wasn't really testing AI necessarily. I wasn't like can this do it or not? I was just playing. I thought it was interesting. And at the end of that experience, I looked back and I looked at how much time and how many different trees I went off of. And it didn't really seem all that much better than just doing it, as an artist. So yeah, so there's a lot there. There's a lot going on. I think it will have a place in our work. But personally, my feeling is it will become a tool. I would love to see it as a tool that does the parts that we don't like to do. There's a lot of technical things that need to happen, particularly in games, and in film, that it would be awesome if AI would just handle that for us. But it seems like right now we're having AI do the part that we like to do, and then we still have to do the grunt work as humans. So if it can be ethically sourced, if it can be used to make more interesting projects, and it's not just about lowering cost and making more movies faster. We already have lots of movies. We already have lots of games. Let's make better ones. That's my opinion on it.
Excellent. Yeah, and for all the audience, let's thank Eric for coming on. Be sure to give his socials a like and follow, which will be in the show notes. And thanks so much for talking about this intricate concept. And thanks so much.